This podcast is brought to you by Ideate and Execute. Do you want to drive innovation in your organization, futurize your enterprise, ideate massively valuable new products, or execute them to market? Then contact us today at ideateandexecute.com and get started.
Why listen to the past when you can listen to the future? Welcome to the Think Future podcast, broadcasting from deep in the heart of Silicon Valley, California. We focus on innovation, startups, and the future, not necessarily those and not necessarily in that order. Here's your host.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Think Future. Once again, we're coming at you live from deep in the heart of Silicon Valley, California. We're talking innovation, startups, the future. Not necessarily those, and not necessarily in that order. If you like the show, just smack that subscribe button and hit that bell to get notified when a new show comes online. And if you're listening on your favorite podcast service, please subscribe and drop us a note on Apple Podcasts. That would be great. Now, I just came off a couple of interviews with people in the education space, and I thought it was really interesting. We were talking about the metaverse, we were talking about education, we were talking about gaming, and we were talking about how education needs to change. Now, if I've always said, and if you've been listening to this show and previous shows and reading my blog, I've always said that we have a lot of issues when it comes to education. Education is a space that sorely needs to be disrupted. Education needs to be disrupted. Now, there's plenty of spaces that need to be disrupted, but education is huge in the disruption space because we are still teaching people. We are still teaching our kids. We are still teaching everybody. Education is still trapped in the early 20th century model. It's almost like we've not moved on from the early 20th century ways of educating people, having people to go to university, go to college, get degrees in high school, elementary school, all the way through all of education. We seem to have forgotten about how we can leverage technology and new pedagogical techniques that have been proven to work. And I'm not talking about things that haven't been proven to work yet. I'm talking about things that have been proven to work for years. This is one of the things that annoys me about being a futurist, is that everything happens. The only question is when. And everything takes much, much, much longer than you think. For example, the internet was founded in the 60s, right? Fax machines were founded in the 40s or 30s or something like that. And telecommuting started in 1982, and only now are we jumping headlong into telecommuting for everyone since the pandemic. We required a crisis. Everything takes longer than you think. But when it comes to something like education, when it comes to something as important as education, if you think about the importance of education, this is setting people up for success. This is setting people up in their careers, in their lives. Education is incredibly important. But we still use the same techniques that we used to educate people from over 100 years ago. So why hasn't this changed? Well, for many, many reasons. Biggest reason is that there are so many people who are invested in keeping it the exact way it is. Now, this is not the only reason why education isn't being disrupted. I mean, it's being disrupted in pockets. You know, the famous Gibson quote, "The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed." There are pockets in places where education and educators have moved forward with the latest and greatest techniques in order to educate individuals on the best way for to get them to learn, and learn in a way that they'll actually retain the learning. But 80-90% of the education that's out there, if you look at standard college education, standard high school education, standard elementary school education, it's the same. It hasn't changed at all. In fact, if anything, it may have gotten worse because we're stepping away from teaching the baseline things the kids need to know in order to live in this world. For example, something like memorization. In fact, why do we need to memorize anything? We should just assume that we are living in a world, and we will continue to live in a world, where everybody has one of these, and this is their lifeline to the world. I should never need to memorize anything ever again, because it's not something I need to know. I could find out in seconds, literally seconds, any piece of information that I needed to memorize. I don't need to anymore. It's all right here. We should assume that all of this is available to us. So what should we be teaching? We should be teaching critical thinking. We should be teaching the way to search and find data that's legitimate, that's truthful. We should be assuming that all of this technology is going to be part of our lives forever, and discarding the things that we don't need, and only teaching the ability for people to move forward. In fact, this is what I've said before. The number one skill anyone needs to have, no matter who you are, no matter what field that you're in, whether you're a technologist, whether you're an educator, whether you're in literature, no matter what it is the ability to learn, the ability to problem solve, the ability to learn more than what you already know. If you could be taught the ability to learn, to educate yourself above all else, then isn't that all you need to know? Because if you have the ability to educate yourself and remember the things that you're educating yourself with, then isn't that the foundational education that everyone needs? We need to go back to the Socratic dialogues. We need to go back to the original types of education that worked. That when you're in a classroom, you're not just listening to a professor standing in front, rambling on. You're interacting with other individuals. You're discussing things. Whenever we're in a social situation, whenever we're in a face-to-face situation, it shouldn't just be one person pushing information down to us. We should be sharing it amongst ourselves. You see, education needs to be disrupted. And there are so many fields out there that are actually doing extremely well at capturing our attention and allowing us to focus on content and material. For example, gaming. I mean, people talk about gamification in education all the time, but basically that's just adding a little bit of flash to what's already there. But if you think about the metaverse, terrible term, I hate it, because it's not really the metaverse. Metaverse is actually multiple universes. It's not online, offline, AR, VR. It's just marketing again. If you take the metaverse and plug it into education, if you immerse students in the world that they need to be in and allow them to work in that world, isn't that the best way to educate people? Instead of just allowing them to absorb through rote learning, wouldn't it be better to create that world for them and allow them to absorb that world and give them the critical thinking techniques in order to use that education and learn more on their own? Education needs to be disrupted. We have to look at the gaming world. We have to look at the world of technology. We have to look at AI. We have to look at all of these different things and start from scratch. Everything that we've been doing so far is not helping to prepare individuals for the world that we live in today. Now, that always was the case. Education always lagged behind the world as it is. But now it is so far behind. The techniques and the technologies that are being used in the education space are now so far behind that students are so woefully unprepared to work in this world that this huge gap is now causing us all sorts of grief. So we need to fill that gap. We need to come up with brand new technologies, brand new ways of educating individuals. So if you're thinking about going into the startup space, startup founder, come up with something that allows us to disrupt innovation, to turn it into an effective tool instead of something that we push people through, and at the end of it, we don't get any useful information. Kids are coming out of the system right now, and what do they know? Are they prepared for life? Are they prepared for work? No. They need remedial training to get to that point. Why is it that you can spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a college education and still end up unable to be a contributing citizen in the world? That's what we have to ask ourselves. What can we do right now to change this? And forget about the sacred cows that are out there and do something different. That's it for me for today. See you next time, and until then, don't forget to think future.